Oh hey the lads, my name is Lossy. Today I have quite an interesting video for you all. This video is meant to act as an eye-opener when it comes to game development, particularly when it comes to the Battlefield franchise. My personal knowledge of game development is super limited to what I've been told at feedback sessions or through chatting with different developers over the years. I haven't studied anything to do with game development, so I'm always as eager to learn about this stuff as some of you lads are. I'm also a firm believer that the more we, the players, know and understand about game development, the better we'll react to certain decisions made by developers. Look at the Behind the Scenes series started by DICE at the start of Battlefield 5's lifecycle. It gave us a look at why DICE made certain decisions or chose to balance something in a very specific way. Sure, players might still be outraged by these decisions, but at least we'll know why DICE went that way. An example of bad communication would be those 2 TTK changes made to Battlefield 5. They were out of the blue and went against what most players wanted. Sure, we had the right to be angry, but I know for a fact that players would have reacted better if DICE actually came out and stated why they thought this was a good idea. Makes it a little bit easier to digest that way. Now, another thing I'd like to mention before we get into the actual questions and answers is that a lot of the decision making for massive AAA titles like Battlefield 5, they come from the very top. Executives at EA who are miles away from the actual people coding and making the game come to life. At the end of the day, it's their game and they decide what direction their developers take. Now again, I don't know how much freedom DICE has when it comes to Battlefield games. Maybe they have a lot more freedom than we think, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. And that doesn't just apply to EA. Within DICE itself, just like any other company of this size, you have pods, teams, and different layers of authority. You might do something awesome, but it goes against what a different team is doing, or maybe your boss's boss just doesn't like the idea. You know, that sort of thing. It goes on everywhere, but when it comes to DICE and Battlefield, it might mean something as significant as ending support. So, with all of that out of the way, I got in touch with Yoye, a former DICE producer that worked on several Battlefield titles including Battlefield 5. He also pioneered the incursions mode in Battlefield 1. He has been super vocal in the Battlefield community over the years, even doing some insane 24-hour live streams on Twitch playing Battlefield with different communities. I found him to be super honest and a genuine guy. Of course, like so many others last year, he moved on from DICE to work on his own projects. His reasons are his own, but he was kind enough to give us some insight into what the decision-making process looks like when it comes to massive AAA games like Battlefield. I didn't want to land Yoye in trouble in making this video, so I asked fairly general questions, not specific to DICE. He does, however, give us a better understanding of the bigger picture. I had 4 questions for Yoye, each following on from some tweets he put out. My questions are mainly expansions on what the tweets stated. So, to start, I asked Yoye to expand on this tweet. From a production standpoint, removing single player would be a bliss. It is where the majority of development time and budget is poured into. As an example, the number of multiplayer maps at launch could likely double should single player be removed. This instantly caught my eye, and I asked him if he could give us a bit more detail, and he replied with this. My initial statement assumes the same development team would remain on the project even without single player. In reality, that seems unrealistic. By cutting single player, sales projections would have to be adjusted accordingly. Simply put, no single player translates to fewer games sold. If you're selling less, you'll make less. The additional multiplayer content would likely not attract enough extra players to make up the delta. This is taken into account when a project is staffed. If single player is removed and the team kept intact, it is up to the project leads to identify where the extra effort should be deployed. That could be creating a content buffer for the live service, where content is held back from launch to be released later as part of the live service, or it could be boosting the amount of content available at launch. But importantly, this is an unrealistic thought experiment. To follow up with this, I asked Yoye to expand on this tweet he sent. Worth keeping in mind though that removing single player would very likely reduce sales and how much money the game makes, so it is unlikely that the same sized team would be kept on to build a multiplayer only Battlefield. Reduced scope means reduced team normally. To follow on from this, Yoye replied to me with, many players who buy the game primarily do so to play single player, more so on console than PC. For others, the combined offer of single player and multiplayer is what makes the value proposition good enough for them to buy the game, where they wouldn't if it was single player only or multiplayer only. I do not claim to know what the different projections are and what the different models would look like, but removing single player definitely affects the business side. Yoye's next point really did surprise me, and maybe it shouldn't have because it really does make sense from a business point of view. Yoye says this: the important thing to note is that without single player, the size of the team would probably not be as big as it is with single player, since the projected revenue from the game would be smaller without single player. This is major in my opinion. I would have assumed, like many others, that with less developers working on single player, more time, more money and more developers could be spent working on multiplayer. According to Yoye, that mightn't necessarily be the case though. Instead, the single player portion of the game might attract so many customers that without it, the studio mightn't necessarily have the funding to maintain such a rich team. This is Yoye's response when I asked him to clarify this point further. Again, these are my speculations and assumptions based on my background and experiences, but I imagine it will be hard to pitch. We're going to spend the same amount of money on the next game, but our projections show the revenue will be smaller. I could be, and hope to be proven wrong when Battlefield 6 launches. I'd love a multiplayer only experience with the full team working towards that goal. But it would surprise me if that was the case. If single player is removed and the team kept intact, I'm almost certain they'd replace the single player part with something else that they hope will bolster revenue the same way, ideally with less development effort. I don't know what this would be, but looking at what Call of Duty has done, maybe a standalone free-to-play battle royale or something else. Speculation is fun. I'm hyped for Battlefield 6 and my colleagues over at DICE are among the best in the world at what they do. While I don't agree with all the decisions made during development and live service of Battlefield 5, I am optimistic about Battlefield 6. I hope it will be the comeback that DICE and Battlefield deserve, with or without single player. A lovely sentiment there from Yoye. I've seen this firsthand, just how close a lot of the development team is at DICE. They really are some of the nicest people I've met, and the level of quality they output is always above the competition. I think their games falter not in their overall quality, but in terms of getting that quality to work across the board in every aspect of the game. You can make the prettiest game in the world, but it has to work well and be optimized and balanced. But finally, just to maybe find some closure when it comes to Battlefield 5 support being ended, I asked Yoye if he could tell me why exactly decisions to cut content are made, who makes them, and what then happens to that specific cut content. Maybe it's recycled into another game. This is what Yoye had to say. It depends on what content we're talking about. If single player is cut, it is a decision made with all the stakeholders reaching very high in the EA hierarchy. If it is about cutting a weapon, a vehicle, a map, or a game mode, the decision is much more local. I have never worked on a game where features and content were not cut. The development team always has the ambition to create the best game ever made, from a quality and quantity perspective. Sometimes quantity has to yield in favor of quality. A common misconception in gaming communities is that the developers are lazy, and that is the reason why something is cut. This is so far from reality. It is often in the developer's interest to make the best possible game, as that usually affects bonuses and future opportunities. If something is cut, there's a reason for it. What can be discussed is if the right thing is cut, and how the team prioritizes features and content. The sooner something is cut, the better, preferably before anything is in software. When the competitive initiative was cut in Battlefield 5, the maps were tuned to be used in the base game instead, so yes, cut features and content can reappear in new places, and other times they are completely scrapped. All in all, I found this thought experiment to be super interesting. All I can say is a huge thank you to Yoye for taking the time to entertain my questions early this morning, for taking a risk in trusting my narrative, and for being generally a really nice guy. And to you lads too. I hope this video gave you a better understanding of the decision making that goes into Battlefield. Do we wish things turned out differently when it came to Battlefield 5 in particular? Of course. But it is what it is, and all we can do now is try and understand why those decisions were made and why it might have been the best thing to do. If you enjoyed today's video, then please do consider subscribing to the channel. I always enjoy working with developers on videos like this one, so your support will be greatly appreciated. Make sure you give Yoye a follow on Twitter too. He's working on his own projects like I mentioned, and I'm sure he would love to see some of you lads check out his work. His Twitter is of course linked down below in the video description. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Share your opinions down below in the comments. Let me know if you found this topic interesting, and I'll see you lads later.